This time I'm going to tell you about the adventure of troubleshooting the transmission on my 2013 Honda CR-V. There's a lot of parts and pieces to this. I'm going to try and make it as fast as I can, but there is a lot of information. Also, this is more of an advanced tutorial for someone who's comfortable testing components and following instructions through a troubleshooting guide. So we were driving in Georgia. For us, that's about 1,000 miles away from our home. Car was running great. It had something in the 170s, thousands of miles. Never given us any serious issues at all. And then the transmission bucked once. No codes yet, so I just took it easy on the car. We drove around Georgia for a couple of days. No major highway driving, really. It did it once or twice again, then it set a code. So I stopped at a nearby parts store. They pulled the code for me because it was one of the transmission solenoid codes. So that would lead you to believe that maybe the solenoid is defective, but I wasn't really sure. So I took note of the code, I wrote it down, we cleared the code, I drove. But the symptom kept happening. It would happen something, usually like maybe a shift from second to third gear. And then when the code came up, the car would go into limp mode. The little green indicator around the D in the gear indicator display would start flashing, and I'd have a check engine code. And it would be one of the solenoid codes. We drove all the way back from Georgia, 1,000 miles, no issues. Then we drive back around, our near home, within 30 minutes to an hour of our home. The transmission starts acting up again the same way. It would like miss a shift and go into limp mode. And then the way it acted is it would rev very, very, very high in each gear. And then it would basically slam into the next gear. It would shift really hard into the next gear. So I tried to be very careful with it. I didn't want to keep doing that to the transmission very long, of course, and make things worse. So if we stopped the car and shut it off for a couple of minutes and then restarted it, the symptom would go away, right? It wouldn't be in limp mode anymore, but the engine light would still be on. I drove it that way for a couple of days, and then I parked it. And I logged on to alldata.com, and I paid for a 30-day subscription to only the information that relates to this car. And I learned the proper troubleshooting procedure for these codes. The good news is these solenoid codes, according to the manufacturer's troubleshooting info, solenoid codes cannot indicate an internal transmission problem. That's going to be an important part you're going to want to take away from this. So I'm going to walk you through all the steps to test those solenoids. There is a single solenoid on the top of the transmission case, There is a dual solenoid assembly on the front of the transmission case facing the radiator. And then there are 5 solenoids sort of in the front side of the case that you can access their connections in order to test them electrically, test the resistance on their coils, and also to be able to apply voltage to them and hear them click and operate. So I'm going to walk you through those the best I can. So we did all this testing. I'm going to get to the meat of the story. If you can test all those solenoids yourself through watching this video, and all those solenoids check okay, then we replaced our PCM. A new PCM from Honda cost us $915 plus a couple $100 for them to program it and transfer the body VIN into the new PCM, program our keys, and so on. So we invested in this car now. We've had it, now the miles are 187,000 miles. I've driven it for a couple thousand miles with the new PCM, and it's running fantastic. It's running better than it ever has. In fact, our gas mileage has increased. So I'm not sure what else could have been going on that PCM, the old PCM, that was degrading our gas mileage. But anyway, an important note as you go through this, we have been very good about changing our transmission fluid in this car. Every 30 to 50,000 miles, I drain the pan and I add about 2.75 quarts of fresh Honda DW1 fluid. And I've always kept the transmission fluid fresh in the car. If you have never changed the transmission fluid and you're having a transmission problem, you should probably change the fluid out. Just replace it, just drain it, and then add your probably 2.75 or until the indicator reads full. Because that's one of the tools I used to troubleshoot this, because I knew that I took good care of this transmission and it should not have an internal transmission problem. So next we'll dig into, I'll show you a diagram that I'll put up on the screen. I'll show you on a diagram where the solenoids are, and then we'll talk about how to properly test those for electrical impedance or resistance, and how you can test them for operation. I chose to remove the single solenoid on top and the dual solenoid on the front because they were relatively easy to remove. I also wanted to inspect them and make sure they were moving when I heard them clicking, and to see if there's any debris or anything. In my case, because I believe because I keep the transmission fluid clean and fresh in there, I didn't really see any buildup in the transmission solenoids. So that was probably to my benefit. So let's get to the diagram, and actually I'll show you one other thing. To get to the single solenoid on top of the case, you have to disconnect a couple of these hoses. This is the transmission oil cooler heat exchanger. These larger ones are for coolant. The smaller ones are for transmission fluid. This sits on top of the case. The single solenoid sits approximately in front of this, so these two hoses coming off block your access to it. What you want to learn it the easy way, not the hard way like I did. When you release the clamps, these hose clamps, and then you try and twist these hoses to get them off, because that's the normal way, I've always taken hoses off, is you break the tension by twisting them. These are aluminum pipes. They're very, very fragile, okay? In fact, I can just push these down with my hands, pretty much. They're not very strong at all. So when you go to take these hoses off, use the utmost care not to squeeze these pipes. Just squeeze the rubber just enough to twist it. I overdid it, and I destroyed this thing. So I actually had to replace this. So hopefully you can avoid that. Hopefully that's something I learned that you don't have to learn the hard way. So when you get to that point, use utmost caution with this transmission oil cooler heat exchanger. Okay, so here's how you're going to access that upper single transmission solenoid for inspection and testing. I'll start by disconnecting your mass airflow sensor. This is right here. Simple clip you squeeze down on the locking tab. Unplug it. Now there's two hose clamps, one up here, one down here. They are 5.5 millimeter heads on those. You're going to loosen those up. Now, there's a few hoses here and pipes connected to this tube. I don't want to disconnect any of those. So what we're going to do is we're just going to pull this rubber tube off the throttle body and the air filter box and lift it up out of the way. Okay, just push it to the side like that. Okay, and you can work around it that way. These hoses are bending, they're fine. Now, you got two clips, one here, one here. You got another clip back here. Then you can twist this up like this and pull it towards the engine. That takes the top lid off the air filter box. Pull out your air filter. Now, straight down here, there's a tab with a 10 millimeter bolt. That's holding down the bottom of the air filter box. We'll pull that off next. It's two plastic fingers, I believe there's two, that go into a little rubber grommet to hold the bottom of that box on. So pull that bolt out, put it someplace safe. Now you can lift up firmly on that plastic tray, lift out the bottom of the air box. So now I'll show you how you can access that upper solenoid. That black plug right there plugs into the solenoid. Those two 10 millimeter bolts you see right there, there's two there, and there's two on the front side. Don't bolt all four of those. You can pull that solenoid out. But like I described, these two hoses here off that cooler are interfering. So you want to carefully loosen those clamps, carefully twist those hoses off without destroying that cooler. Because as you can see, that's the cooler that I had to replace. As for the dual solenoid that's on the front of the transmission case, you're going to want to have the car up on ramps or jack stands. You want to take off the plastic shield underneath the car, and it's bolted right to the front of the transmission case. I'll show you that in the diagram like I promised, but I'm not going to pull all that off again because I've already done all that. But Once you get that plastic shield down, it's easy to access on the front. There's a few 10mm bolts that hold that in. One other thing you want to watch out for when you are pulling these solenoids off is there's short metal pipes that they may come off with the solenoid, or they may stay in the transmission body. You want to make sure you know where those tiny little pipes came from. Don't get them mixed up. They all have little screens in them. You want to inspect those screens while you're there. Mine were clean because I change my fluid all the time, but yours may have some debris in it. You want to clean out those screens while you're there. And then you're going to want to have the correct gaskets on hand, because each of those two solenoids have a gasket underneath them that's probably going to have to be replaced. I was careful when I pulled mine off, but it still destroyed those gaskets, so I had to get new gaskets right from Honda. I'll give you the descriptions for all that too. Okay, so this is the diagram direct from Honda. This is the entire transmission case. Up on the upper left there, you'll see solenoid that's marked number 4. Its gasket is marked number 5. You can see the little pipes underneath it that are number 3, and the O-rings that go on those pipes is number 15. That's also important. A little bit lower, you can see the solenoid marked number 6. Its gasket is marked number 7, and it has 4 of those little pipes and O-rings. That shows the physical location, how it bolts onto the transmission. Also to the lower right there a little bit, you see number 8 and 17. That's the harness that feeds the 5 other solenoids that are tucked behind a cover. I never took the cover off. That plug goes left all the way through that transmission case and is actually plugged into a harness on the other side. You could actually unplug that harness and test those solenoids right from that plug, which is exactly what I did. Now you can see some of the parts. If you look at parts numbers 0, 4, 5, 6, and 7, those are the ones I got at and tested. Now I've highlighted the diagram a little bit better, so you can see exactly what we're looking at. Those are the solenoids that need to be tested, as well as the bundle down in the bottom right. You just need to electrically test those, because those are, I didn't find it necessary to take all those out. Once you've physically and electrically tested all of those, then you know that your solenoids are good and that you may want to be looking at a replacement PCM rather than a replacement transmission. On the bottom, I've highlighted the price of those solenoids. Hopefully you don't have bad solenoids, because those are very expensive. You can get a used transmission for the same price as just one of those solenoids. And these also give you the part numbers for those gaskets you're going to need if you remove those solenoids for testing. So hopefully this information is helpful. Next, we're going to go over the electrical values and the pinout diagram for the bundle of 5 solenoids in the bottom right, to make sure you know exactly how to test those electrically, what resistance values they should show, and that'll be helpful. So this next diagram shows you how to test the plugs on the single solenoid on top and the dual solenoid on the front. Each of those solenoids have a 2-pin plug. You're going to put a multimeter on the ohm scale across those 2 pins. You're to verify whether or not there's 4.8 to 6 ohms across those pins. If there is, that's good. Then what you're going to do is you're going to apply 12 volts across those pins, one negative on one side, plus 12 on the other side, and listen for them to click. If all 3 of those pins, all 3 of those plugs provide a clicking sound and they show the correct impedance on the multimeter, then you can say those solenoids are good. Now we'll go to the 5-pack on the side of the transmission. There's a picture of the plug on the left side. It is a 7-pin plug. Now look on the right side of this image. It shows you shift solenoid A through E. So you want to pay attention to pins number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 7. You want to put your multimeter black lead to body ground, and use your positive lead on one of those pins and see if they show an impedance of 13.8 to 17.1 ohms, which would be good. Then you want to use the same 12-volt testing, except this time you're going to use black to ground and positive to one of those pins, and listen for the clicking. If they click, they're good. Okay, so just to recap and conclude this, basically, if you're getting weird symptoms like I was, where your transmission's bucking and kicking very intermittently, doesn't do it all the time, and it'll go into limp mode sometimes. When you shut the car off, turn it back on, limp mode goes away. You don't necessarily want to just have your transmission replaced. You probably want to go through these steps. Test the solenoids, or have your mechanic test the solenoids. You might be dealing with a bad PCM like I was. Replacing the PCM and having the dealer properly program it solved all our problems. Our transmission shifts perfectly again, and We even get better gas mileage now than we ever did before. And the engine, we feel the engine runs smoother. So I'm concerned, the reason I made this video, I'm concerned that there may be other people out there that have bad PCMs. Maybe independent shops are diagnosing it as a bad transmission based on the symptoms, replacing the transmission maybe, and still leaving the customer in the same place where they were. Because if you put a new transmission in this car and you don't address the issue, the possible issue in the PCM is going to work just the same way. It's going to skip a shift. It's going to act like the transmission's totally messed up, even with a known good transmission. So just a piece of information. If you're having transmission issues on your 13 Honda CR-Vs, or maybe other Hondas that have the same transmission, you want to make sure the solenoids are properly tested and try and rule out a bad PCM. So hopefully this is helpful for other people. I know I wish I knew this before I went through all this hassle, because I was very concerned about this. We want to keep this car a long time. So hopefully this helps you too. Thanks for watching.